When we think of witchcraft as the old religion, most of us immediately think of pre-Christian times in Western Europe. We like to think that the peaceful and nature-centric pagan clans roaming Europe at the time were inhumanely run over and subjugated by that horrid upstart Christianity. The resilient pagans were forced underground, passing down sacred knowledge, mother to daughter, through to the present day. While there was certainly an element of this, I'm not going to deny that, I'm going to argue, though, that witchcraft as we practice it today dates back, at best, to the late 19th century. Merry meet or merry meet again, everyone. I'm Witch Hazel, here to share with you how I managed to combine the practical hands-on processes of witchcraft with the sometimes more difficult to master elements of spirituality. Today, I'm wandering back to our theme of witchcraft history with a little review of the late 19th century theosophical expansion and what it meant for witchcraft. So in order to do that, though, we're going to have to go a bit further back. Most of us learned in history class that the Romans ushered in Christianity to Europe. Paganism was indeed forced to go quiet, but many of the pagans converted when Christianity adopted very similar traditions. The Romans also brought with them all the benefits of intricate and well-established trade routes. So these routes not only brought supplies and luxury goods, but information and ideas as well. These ideas tended to flourish in the more populated ports and cities, leaving rural areas to cultivate anything older and more locally traditional. With the fall of the Roman Empire, Europe was cut off for a time from the centers of knowledge and discovery in the East and fell into its dark ages. It would be several hundred years before the exchange of ideas between East and West would rekindle the spark of advancement in Europe. This is important to our story because here is where we get to see a strong argument for the maintenance of paganism. Europeans at this time, living under the heavy-handed regimes of both the church and their rulers, would likely have fallen back to traditional beliefs, now labeled, of course, as superstition, to help ensure things like good harvests and good health. After all, the powers that be were much too busy fighting amongst themselves and couldn't be bothered with such trivial things, right? Well, eventually, advancement in thought would return to Europe in the form of the Renaissance. But we're going to see why this would cause actually even bigger problems for paganism. Before we get to that, however, if you're enjoying the video, please remember to click the like button and subscribe if you haven't already, because this is where you're going to find all the practical and spiritual guidance you need to create a well-rounded witchy or spiritual practice. As we're going to see as we continue in this discussion, the connection between human beings and the divine is vital. It is absolutely essential to creating our ideal lives. So if you've been feeling a disconnect in your spiritual well-being, please take a look in the description for this video. I have a brand new free resource for you. It's a 4-step guide to intuitive power and is meant to help you see more consistent results in your manifesting within about 30 days. And if you're interested in seeing why intuitive power matters, let's get back to our history. From the time of the Renaissance on, disappointment with religion began to increase. People were not getting the spiritual answers they needed from organized religion and began to look in other directions. The Renaissance fed into the scientific revolution and that into the Age of Enlightenment. The Age of Enlightenment also is the Age of Reason, and this was in the 17th and 18th centuries. So this was just as problematic from a spiritual standpoint, because now we were nixing the divine completely out of the equation and relying on scientific experimentation to prove all. Human beings were taking on the role of the divine, which we still do, but the issue is we're always going to be pretenders. We don't know it all, and we never will. Science is a great and wonderful thing, but it doesn't beat the intuitive powers that we were born with. Through skewing the balance toward science, we trained ourselves to ignore our divine connection, and oh golly gosh, we still came up short in understanding life and how to influence it. One notable attempt to meld spiritual growth and intellectualism came into fashion around this time, and that was the Freemasons. Interestingly, the workings of the Freemasons is also dubbed the craft. Unfortunately, this movement became a premier fraternal organization, excluding in practice, if not in policy, the vast majority of the people that we associate with paganism and witchcraft. So by the 19th century, we were starting to realize this. There were movements to reconnect to the natural world. This is when we see the rise of the naturalists. People like Darwin and Thoreau combining science and natural observation. It became popular to explore and catalog the outdoors, regaining some of the information that we'd lost, but we were still missing the spiritual side, the spiritual point. Throughout all of this, there were still remnants of pagan tradition waiting in the sidelines. Occasionally, paganism blipped onto the radar with things like the publication of Charles Leland's Aradia, or Gospel of the Witches, but the disconnect between humanity and spirituality persisted until enough of the forgotten wisdom of the Far East found its way back to Europe. And its exoticism, more appealing than the familiar pagan remnants, provided a venue for spiritual breakthrough. Toward the end of the century, in 1875, a new non-denominational spiritual society was founded, and this is where I'm going to say modern witchcraft came into view. The Theosophical Society was founded in 1875 by a group of spiritualists and occultists, which included Colonel Henry Steele and Helena Petrovna Blavatsky. The purpose of the organization was to search for spiritual truth outside of religious ties and serve humanity via the dissemination of this information. Theosophists promoted the idea of spiritual wisdom coming directly from ascended spiritual masters and created their world and cosmic view on the information supposedly gained from these masters. Much of the information and theories of the Theosophists is based in ancient Eastern tradition. This is not a new concept. Eastern traditions and beliefs have made their way west and been adopted by Westerners for as long as trade routes have existed. Granted, these occult themes were kept marginalized, but we can see them in 15th century Italy when early renditions of the tarot deck appeared. And later on, it expanded with an uptick in interest in fortune-telling in France in the late 18th century. In 1888, the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn was established, combining elements from both the theosophical view of a spirituality pieced together from ancient Eastern sources and the secrecy of the Freemasons. In fact, all three founders of the Golden Dawn were Freemasons, and the influence of the Golden Dawn on modern witchcraft is undeniable. It is the basis for Wicca and has been argued as the largest single influence on 20th century occultism. The ideas of secrecy, hierarchy, and ceremony, essentially all the main facets of modern coven organization, all derived from the Golden Dawn. Use of Egyptian reference as well as Judaic mysticism and incorporating the Kabbalah's tree of life into the use of the tarot all came out of this period, and both of these spiritual groups. Finally, the last piece of the puzzle, Gerald Gardner, the father of modern witchcraft and founder of Wicca. Despite his insistence that he was reviving a personal pagan past, he was a known Rosicrucian, which is an esoteric fraternal order similar to the Golden Dawn, and he spent much of his early life outside of Britain and observing spiritual practices in colonial Ceylon and Malaya. And he structured Wicca with elements of Freemasonry and the ceremonial magic from Hermetic orders like the Golden Dawn. For anyone ready to argue that, well, I'm not Wiccan, so my practice is the real paganism, I'm sorry, my friend, but if you are of Western European descent and learned your craft through resources published after 1945, which was when the last anti-witchcraft laws were repealed in Great Britain, and Gardner was able to market his new religion. Or if you learned from teachers who studied these same resources, then what you learned was not old. If you have resources dating even from the 18th or 19th century, these were also intellectualized hodgepodges of Eastern thought and not based on rural European practices. So, if you want the real old religion, find out all of grandma's superstitions and home remedies and follow them. That is the true European pagan tradition. Now, I'm not trying to play down Wicca or give the impression that witchcraft is a hoax. It most certainly is not. It is an evolution of spiritual thought, and what we follow today is reconnecting us to ancient wisdom that we lost. We lost touch with it for centuries. My only gripe is this marketing of witchcraft as some sort of never broken continual line of wisdom. Witchcraft today is a collection of knowledge and experiences molded over time. It has gone into hiding. It has gone undercover. It has remained in our common experience as tradition, superstition, herbalism, faith healing, any number of things. But the idea of a group of people getting together, or even an individual working with focused intent and esoteric ritual in everyday life at any time previous to the early 20th century is something I find difficult to believe when talking about Western European history. history and culture. So what witches practice today came straight from the Theosophists, the Golden Dawn, and Gerald Gardner. Sprinkle in local folklore and tradition, and voila, we have modern witchcraft. I think we often want our practice to be seen as the oldest because that lends credibility. But older doesn't necessarily equate to better. There's a reason tastes and tools evolve. The modern convection oven bears no resemblance to a campfire, but does a much more consistent and reliable job of cooking. There's nothing wrong with or inauthentic about modern witchcraft, so let's enjoy it for what it is. Infuse it with individual preference and personal history. The best spiritual practice is the one that works. It's the one that connects us to the divine and reminds us that we are part of that energy. And that's my belief on it. And personally, I like reading up on these early witches and esoteric practitioners. They were pioneering in their defiance of the prevailing religion and attempts to broaden their spiritual understanding by adopting information from ancient cultures they had no personal connection with. They were repairing broken and neglected connections. And that's the part I find fascinating. Humanity's draw to each other and the unknown. It's the divine's attempt to remind us that we're all connected. Let me know what your thoughts on the theme are. I hope you've enjoyed this review of some historical plot points, and I hope you will join me again in the next video. Until then, everyone, blessed be.